Well, welcome to Straight Shooting News. Tonight we're going to have episode 9 of The Awakening. Fighting back to save the human race. We're going to be covering some segments from the committee hearings tonight for you, and some interesting topics. So I'm your host, Bandana Red. Like we said, there'll be no resolutions in 2023, just a massive awakening that will be beneficial for the whole human race. Just stay the course, remain confident and positive. We're coming to you from the Merrimack Valley, Massachusetts, where the shot heard around the world was fired at the Concord Bridge and changed the way the human race would be ruled, or not be ruled by kings, queens, czars, emperors, and tyrants, basically. So tonight we'll have another awakening for you, as the political pendulum keeps swinging left to right, right to left, left to right, again and again, with a hypnotic effect, until all your rights are eroded away, unless, of course, we utilize our defense, the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. Show it to every show, because that's what the show's about, your rights and your Constitution. And defense of the Constitution is Marbury versus Madison, which states all laws repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. So what we're talking about now tonight will be, don't be distracted by the carnival barkers. You do need to pay attention. Paying attention isn't a negative thing, as some people would like you to believe. It's a positive thing. Because at this time in history, you need to pay attention. There's a lot happening right now. Don't fall for the carnival barkers selling you opium. So our show tonight will be about good news, and how the GOP House is actually doing what they promised the American people they would do. I mean, the bad news part of it is they're actually exposing the bad, but that's good. It's not negativity, it's positive. Because people need to see what's going on right now. So what we got here tonight, now first clip, I'm going to show you what abuse of power under the color of law looks like. And that's just a start to the violations that have been happening to our rights and our Constitution. It's almost like their own arrogance now is going to cost them. And the only one to make sure that's going to happen is going to be each and every one of us to demand accountability. So with that, why don't you roll this first one? And I want to show you a little bit of a clip we have here. And it tells you a little bit about Epstein's enablers. Look who shows up again, Epstein. Just a ranking member on the committee that is pulling out important facts that you need to understand. So, saying that, let's see what we got for you. We found this clip, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, but you definitely want to see this, because it's a good explanation. It's going to show you exactly who we're dealing with and what we may be dealing with. With that.
And while the Democrats thoroughly embarrass themselves, we're going to key in on one figure who has a particularly sordid past. Now, who can forget how the left obsessed about President Trump's so-called unique threat to journalists? Remember, they were saying stuff like, someone's going to get hurt. He's going to get someone killed. Well, boy, how things have changed. At today's hearing on the weaponization of government, Democrats are now saying that the reporters themselves are the real threats.
I want to underscore the very real threat posed by Twitter files and by the witnesses in front of us today. I'm not exaggerating when I say that you have called before you 2 witnesses who pose a direct threat to people who oppose them.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Delegate Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands. Now, like the rest of her party, she's alarmed when independent journalists shine a light on the corruption of our Democrats in government.
Twitter, Facebook, Google, and other companies developed a formal system for taking in moderation requests from every corner of government, making lists of people whose opinions, beliefs, associations, or sympathies are deemed misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. The making of such lists is a form of digital McCarthyism.
Well, Ms. Plaskett sees that comment as a threat to her power and responded in kind.
All the so-called Twitter files really showed was a discussion on content moderation, and that we only got a fraction of the discussion. The Republicans have brought in 2 of Elon Musk's public scribes to release cherry-picked, out-of-context emails and screenshots designed to promote his chosen narrative.
Now, why did the Democrats choose Plaskett to be their ranking member on this committee in the first place? Well, sure, she had the media swooning during the Trump impeachment hearings, but she also has a shady past of her own. During her candidacy to represent the U.S. Virgin Islands, she received over $10,000 in contributions from Jeffrey Epstein. Contributions she had to be pressured into returning when Epstein's well-known sexual crimes were made public. In fact, her relationship with Epstein was apparently so galling that the Pulitzer Prize-winning Virgin Islands Daily News asked in February of 2020 whether she was one of his enablers. Well, I hope she doesn't think we're cherry-picking. Now, if a U.S. representative doesn't care about protecting our citizens' First Amendment rights, he or she should not be representing this committee, or honestly, be serving on it at all. Joining me now is Congressman Dan Bishop of the House Government Weaponization Subcommittee. That's a mouthful. Congressman, she was really a piece of work today. But what happened to Democrats loving the idea of a robust, aggressive, and independent press corps? Where did that go?
Oh, man, Laura, that is so gone. The hostility that you saw, not only from Ms. Plaskett, but everybody on the Democrat side of the aisle against these 2 heroes of liberal journalists, Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi, they were fantastic. And, you know, it is astonishing. It is a part of this chilling episode of which we've only seen the tip of the iceberg, that these gentlemen and several others have begun with 17 parts of the Twitter files. It's just the surface, the part above the water, Laura. There's this, what they call censorship industrial complex that is burgeoning across. I mean, it's covered the whole federal government, all these NGOs, and only these several journalists are standing up. And boy, the ruling class in the Democratic Party are hostile, and they are belittling and trying to destroy folks like this who are speaking out to let the American people know what is happening.
Well, the fact is the Democrats' policies aren't working, right? The country has no growth. Not going to have any growth next year, like 1.6% in 2024. So it's over. Their policies have failed. So now all they're left with is racial fear-mongering and censorship and basically, you know, deciding to shut down free speech. That's all they're left with. I don't know where else they go. And this was obvious today. But Dan Goldman, who basically bought his congressional seat, was rebuked by Chairman Jordan. Watch this episode.
With Twitter, you cannot find actual evidence of any direct government censorship of any lawful speech.
The following email from Clark Humphrey, Executive Office of the Presidency, wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed.
Now, the other networks were saying this hearing was a bust. Of course, they don't really talk about the substance or the underlying issues involved. Your reaction?
Bust, and what it does, Laura, is it sets the table. There's much more to be discovered and disclosed, but what we're facing is a censorship regime unlike anything else we've seen in United States government history. And your observation about Plaskett and the others is very key to this. The Democrats, the left, despise the First Amendment. They're ready to see that go because they want power. I'm telling you, as these journalists who've been well-known journalists for a long time said, this is the biggest story of their lives, and they find it chilling. They're personally afraid of what is happening in the United States with the government, the NGOs, and the media, social media platforms, this complex. We have to root it out. to save the First Amendment in this country.
What is her fear? And what is with Goldman and the mainstream media? What are they so desperate to cover up? Jeffrey Epstein is still with us, and his influence must be cleansed. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg, like Representative Bishop said, and that's so true. There's so much more here. And what are they doing it for? I think Laura just put it to you straightforward. All these field policies. You'll see more by the end of this segment about field policies. So they need censorship. And they need the race baiting. I understand why she's on the committee. I understand why she's a ranking member. Do you? It's obvious. I don't think she's qualified for that job, but she's there for a reason, to offset Jim Jordan. And I'm going to add to it too. They're going to end up forcing World War III to cover up for these government crimes. But let's get right down to it. The major thing we're talking about here is we need to save the First Amendment in our country. Keep in mind, without free speech, there's tyranny and atrocities that will be committed against the human race. Also, we do hope, for those of you who never completely understood the importance of the Second Amendment, we are awakening you to the reason our founders would and who knew why it was so important when they stated the liberty of a free state, as they put it. It must be preserved. The second is there to preserve the first. Well, let's go back. Let's go back and take another look at this Virgin Islands thing to see what else is going on. We wanted to show you these headlines again. She was so arrogant, right? That she was going to keep the money she got from Epstein. And they had to force her overnight to turn around and return the donations. This is the type of government you have. It's arrogant. It's too arrogant. And this is what our founders feared, which is why they gave us the Bill of Rights.
Now, Stacey Plaskett isn't the only one with ties to Jeffrey Epstein, or at least suspected ties. One famous Wall Street CEO might be in some hot water over new revelations. We'll explain about that. Back in December, the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands alleged in a lawsuit that J.P. Morgan turned a blind eye to the fact that Jeffrey Epstein used the bank to facilitate as many sex trafficking crimes. Now, J.P. Morgan has spent the past few months fighting in court to shield its CEO, Jamie Dimon. But today, a big setback. Fox News senior national correspondent Kevin Corke is here with all the details. Kevin.
Very interesting story, and I know from a legal perspective, I know you love this one. Let me share it for the folks at home. Now, a judge, as you point out, Laura, has ordered J.P. Morgan Chase to hand over more documents to the U.S. Virgin Islands concerning its CEO, Jamie Dimon. Now, that request is actually part of the territory's lawsuit against the bank, accusing it of aiding Jeffrey Epstein in his sex trafficking ring. Manhattan District Judge Jed Rakoff has ordered the bank to turn over documents from 2015 to 2019, a period after J.P. Morgan had actually dropped Epstein as a client. The USVI is also said to be calling Jamie Dimon a likely source of relevant and unique information about why J.P. Morgan kept Epstein on as long as it did. Now, the Virgin Islands are also said to be seeking damages from J.P. Morgan Chase, allegedly for aiding in Epstein's sex trafficking by keeping him on as a client and missing, quote, red flags about his misconduct. Now, Epstein, who had been at J.P. Morgan from 2000 to 2013 as a client, allegedly killed himself in a jail cell back in August of 2019 while awaiting trial. If that is what you believe, that is what we have been told. Now, J.P. Morgan has previously said this is all a big fishing expedition, Laura, noting that the territory has already recovered more than $105 million from Epstein's estate, but they are digging, and we'll keep watching. Laura?
Kevin, the concern is that Epstein was known to, have surveillance all around that island.
That's right.
Cameras everywhere. Have we seen any of that footage of who was coming
Not
in
only
now?
have
What
we
happened to that?
Yeah, we haven't seen that footage. What about the thing over in New Mexico? I mean, there's a lot more to this story. He had a place in New York as well. I haven't seen a black book. I haven't seen video of the people who are coming and going. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. The public has not yet seen it.
Now, Jeffrey Epstein, obviously, his specter continues to haunt the global elite, and most recently, JP Morgan have been sort of caught up in it. How has that made you feel?
You know, I can't talk about litigation, but you should know that at JP Morgan, we got top experts, including some of the best people that come out of the DOJ, et cetera, who review and make judgment decisions like this. And they generally do a very good job.
But how has it made you feel as the CEO of JP Morgan, as a figurehead for the bank?
It's unfortunate, but it's life.
We are starting to get a more precise sense of what it means when Joe Biden brags about the strongest and most equitable economic recovery in modern history. What it means is it could be time to buy gold and stockpile food. Ooh, there's a deal on Russian steel case? I think I'll pick up a pallet. Just kidding, sort of. Yesterday, some of the biggest banks in this country, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, collectively lost more than $50 billion in market value in one day. That's quite a hit. On the other hand, those banks still exist, and you can't say that for Silicon Valley Bank. As of this morning, Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, has gone under completely. That makes the second biggest bank failure in the history of this country. And is significant. SVB financed nearly half of all venture-backed healthcare and technology companies in the United States. It also apparently held significant cash reserves for some of the biggest cryptocurrencies. And it's now gone. Federal regulators have renamed it and taken it over. And that means an awful lot of people lost an awful lot of money. And no, most of that money was not insured, no matter what they tell you. In fact, when customers showed up at SVB's branch in Manhattan today to get their deposits back, managers called the police. So what we have here is a 1929-style bank run, and that's not a good sign for anyone. The question is whether the people who run SVB saw it coming. The CEO, a man called Greg Becker, apparently sold more than $2 million in bank stock over the last 2 weeks. According to the site Unusual Whales, several other high-level employees of SVB, including Chief Marketing Officer Michelle Draper, Chief Operations Officer Phil Cox, General Counsel Michael Zuckert, all sold significant amounts of stock in SVB this year.
There you go. There's some video of people standing out in the rain hoping to get their money out of the bank. Yeah, this is California. It's raining in California. Now there it is again. Take a quick look. There they are. And then we'll have another clip from another bank. From the same bank, but another location down the road. That's coming here. There you go, and it's another location. They're out there in the rain. They want their money. Wouldn't you? Look at that. That's pathetic. That's pretty pathetic, but that's where we come to now. Let's just unwind a little bit about that for you. Now, these are the words of the reporter. Jeffrey Epstein continues to haunt the global elites. Well, Jamie Dimon's words, if you listen carefully, what he said, we have the best experts, including those who come out of the DOJ. It's unfortunate, but it's life. That's a pretty arrogant statement. This is good old JP Morgan Bank. This is Jamie Dimon, who they're covering for. Was a big communist Chinese investor. No one touched that on there. Well, you know, while he was sitting there doing his best impression of Alfred E. Newman of What Me Worry, what are all these other Americans going to do? The CEOs grabbed their money and ran. Tucker said it. A 1929 style bank run. Is that what's coming? Well, the word out tonight is Janet Yellen is going to run to the rescue and try to make sure this doesn't get out of hand. So when you see all these people, and we're going to show you more in the next segment, some segments from that committee hearing, you know, you got to ask yourself, does the First Amendment really pose a threat to these global elites? And is that who the government officials are really representing. Let that sink in. The old story about the Democrat Party being for the being a party for the people and the small guy. I think those days are long gone. Because if you take the time to watch that whole committee hearing, they were definitely defending everything that's a threat to our freedoms. But let's listen to the next segment now. What Dan Bongino had to say about a police state, and then we'll hear from a little bit from Matt Taibbi before we move to part two. We'll actually show you some clips about the from the hearing, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing more this week about the banking thing. So let's roll this.
Abusing surveillance, including with big corporations. These are all components of a police state. We're already living in one right now. One journalist who exposed the police state just went head-to-head with Democrats on Capitol Hill and was explosive. He's here for an unfiltered exclusive. It's impossible to ignore the overwhelming evidence that proves we are no longer living in a constitutional republic. Now, folks, we can save it, but we are in a police state right now. What's one of the first components of a police state if you were living in one? Like now? Well, the police state has to control the public narrative. You know, the narrative, the story they tell you at all times.
You pointed to the lab leak theory even before we did. Why do you think that you were excluded from these conversations?
Because it was told to me that they wanted a single narrative and that I obviously had a different point of view.
The nation learned for the first time in history a former president's home was searched by federal agents acting lawfully.
So you got to control the narrative, and how do you do it? The state-controlled media, of course. Can't have a police state without that. Because once a police state can hide behind the media that serves as kind of a Praetorian guard for them, the police state is then free to investigate people instead of investigating crimes. When a crime is committed, right, I used to do this kind of stuff. Investigators are supposed to use the evidence of the crime and go and find and arrest the suspect, who's then tried in a court of law for those crimes, right? Not complicated. I know libs are a little confused. But in a police state, the one the liberals love, the left, they pick this narrative, right? And when someone dares speak out against the narrative, they go search for the crime for that person. They're surveilled or raided in search of a crime and then dragged through the legal system. In the police state, while they're occupied targeting political enemies, they also ignore real crimes. That's because another hallmark of a police state is its abuse of its surveillance powers. You got to be watching people, right? I mean, we've known for months now that the FBI used what's called a geofence warrant to track what, one or two people? No, thousands of people's cell phones, both inside and outside the Capitol building on January 6th. Sounds kind of like a general warrant to me. We're not supposed to have those. Police states arrived, though. They're already here. And just the other day, we learned the FBI bought location data, according to Wired magazine, in violation of the Fourth Amendment and worked with hospitals to attack Second Amendment rights. It's almost like they think the Constitution's a suggestion or something. It's not. Wasn't written that way. So to recap, a fully functional police state needs a couple things: state-controlled media, investigating people in search of crimes, and surveillance abuses. But to pull it all off, it has to be run by some corrupt law enforcement folks willing to carry out the mission. Know what I mean? Listen, this is a big one. Why? Because not only do they abuse their power when they get the guns and the badges, some of them, but they look the other way when actual crimes are committed. I told you we'd get here. Listen, the police state's here. We're making the case. You may not like it, but it's true. Not only does corrupt law enforcement investigate people instead of crimes, they ignore real crimes and silence anyone who tries to speak out. We've had several FBI whistleblowers on this very show right here.
Not willing to participate in that. That violates the oath that I believe that I swore, and I've done it more than once.
I was initially put as AWOL for 1 day, and then ultimately I was suspended without pay approximately a month ago.
And of course, both of those men came under attack by the mainstream media. For a police state to thrive, it also needs corporate collusion. You got to have that to apply pressure in that market to subjugate you and me. You think that's not happening? Well, big banks were caught tracking your firearms purchases at gun locations. Meanwhile, what's the FBI worried about? Of course, targeting Catholics in a Latin mass. Why? Well, because we're in a police state, like I said. What happens when part of the police state gets threatened or taken away? Well, they panic, they freak out. That's why the left threw a tantrum when Elon Musk took over Twitter, because it could no longer be used as their police state mouthpiece. Instead, the police state scrambled. It scrambled all its jets against Elon Musk in a 30-front war against free speech. Turns out the FTC, full of bureaucrats, is now demanding to see Elon Musk's internal communications at Twitter and wants the names of journalists who helped release the Twitter files. Thought we had a First Amendment, freedom of the press. Sure feels like they're investigating a person in search of a crime, right? Sounds like that to me. One of the journalists at the center of the Twitter files testified on Capitol Hill about what he called the censorship industrial complex.
We learned Twitter, Facebook, Google, and other companies developed a formal system for taking in moderation requests from every corner of government.
So you're not going to tell us when Musk first approached you?
Again, Congresswoman, you're asking me to
you're
asking a journalist to reveal a source.
So then you consider Mr. Musk to be the direct source of all this?
No, now you're trying to get me to say that he is the source. I just can't answer your question.
And if we don't fight back, the police state's going to grow bigger and more powerful. Joining me now for his first interview since that hearing is a journalist you just heard testify on Capitol Hill, journalist Matt Taibbi. Matt, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it. I've been very concerned about this symbiosis between these NGOs, government, and the FBI, and censorship. Through your work at the Twitter files, how exactly does it work, and which results in content being pulled down?
Well, originally what we thought was going on was that only the FBI and DHS and maybe a few other agencies were directly telling companies like Twitter to pull down a few accounts here and there. But as time went on, we learned that actually there's a whole complex of organizations and NGOs. A lot of them are state-funded. Some of them are entirely state-funded, that are sending huge lists of names to these companies. And that's the primary route by which people are taken off places like Twitter or Facebook or any social media site.
Matt, libertarian-leaning conservatives like myself have long been concerned about things like the Patriot Act, because what happens is, I think what you saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the Twitter files, where it starts as, hey, we're trying to get rid of foreign interference in elections, and it morphs into, Joey Bag of Donuts on the corner makes a tweet about the vaccine and finds himself, in the doghouse. I mean, am I wrong in that analysis?
No, that's absolutely the correct analysis, because this effort actually began with counterterrorism in 2015, then it progressed to Russian foreign interference in 2016, 2017, and then next thing you knew, it was domestic violent extremism. And then what we found just this week, we found memos talking about the desire to strike down true stories of vaccine side effects or true stories that might encourage vaccine hesitancy. So they went from counterterrorism to going after true material within the space of a couple of years. So it's a small group of people at first, and now it's a really, really big pool of people that they're looking at.
Matt, I want to play for you this quick clip. Obviously, you were there, you've seen it, but the audience may not have. You're the one who exposed this malfeasance, and stunningly, you became the focus of their ire. Here, take a look.
That if we can take off the tinfoil hat, that there's not a vast conspiracy.
Are you being paid to be here today, either through consulting fees, campaign contribution to your next run?
Data was given to these so-called journalists before us now.
I'm not a so-called journalist. I've won the National Magazine Award, the I.F. Stone Award for Independent Journalism, and I've written 10 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers.
Matt, this is disgusting. Tinfoil cap, you were paid off. You're a so-called journalist despite a resume to die for. That had to bother you personally.
Well, I expected that, but I think the thing that's extraordinary about what happened to both me and to Michael Schellenberger, the other witness, is they would never treat a New York Times reporter like that or a or Post reporter like that and suggest that it was somehow, wrong for a reporter to make money, which came out during the hearing. They asked me if I'd been paid to testify, which was totally outrageous. They called us a direct threat to people who oppose them. That's very ominous language for the government to talk about with regard to journalists. And again, they would never do that with somebody they considered one of their own, which, a typical mainstream reporter. I think that was very, very disturbing what happened yesterday.
Matt, I don't know your politics. Frankly, I don't care. But I know you're a journalist, not a so-called journalist. And I really want to thank you. It's guys like you that are going to save this space, the journalism space. Thanks for your time.
I always get a big kick out of when Dan likes to say, I used to do this for a living. I always laugh. But he did coin a great line in that segment. The Constitution is not just a suggestion. Think about that. Some people actually think it's a suggestion. They're tracking Second Amendment advocates who purchase guns. Really? That's not allowed. You have a reasonable right to privacy. So, what do they do in this Constitution? And I think the reason why I do like Dan's show is because, like he said, he's a libertarian-leaning conservative. Now, I like to use the term constitutionalist, but, I'm not really sure people even understand the meaning of conservatism or libertarianism, or even what a constitutionalist is. Because we're going to try to give you the awakening to those true meanings. Let's get back to that video. They're talking about state-funded NGOs taking away our freedoms, non-elected government officials, NGOs. And they're using federal law enforcement to do so. They want to strip away the First Amendment. I already told you the importance of that. They want surveillance on the people. How many cameras are around your town? Do you even know if they're there or not? People think these home security systems are great with a camera, but I don't know. I think we need to cut back on the surveillance state quite a bit. And there's censorship industrial complex. Great term, because that's what it's turned into. So there's a whole complex here. They're all colluding to take away this. You said it right there. The Patriot Act started with counterterrorism. And now we are the terrorists that are a threat to the tyrannical power. I keep saying, Patriot Act is the elephant in the room. That has to go. There's other ways to provide for security. That is a that just took away your constitutional rights. Let's just get right down to it. And then what Matt said, they wouldn't attack these other talking heads in the media, because they want all you subjects to believe only the mainstream media propaganda. And keep in mind, nothing of this has to do with capitalism, free market principles, any elements of a free country. Our founders knew this day would come. And that's why they put the Bill of Rights in here. They can mess with the way the Constitution and government performs. But the one thing that's inalienable is your rights. You better learn them and be willing to stand up for them. With that, we're going to conclude segment 1, and we're going to go into segment 2 with some more clips from this hearing.